Okay, hello everybody. Thank you very much for being there. Welcome to our sixth lesson so far. My goodness, I still remember getting ready for the first one, and we're already working with the sixth one. My goodness, thank you very much, as I said before, for being there. Hi, Lionel. Thank you for connecting. We're going to check that everything is working well. I've got all my gadgets here. Yeah, this is working, everything. All right, good. So I don't know if you paid attention to today's topic, that is how to become an active listener, how to master the art of active listening. And perhaps you might be wondering, what does this have to do with becoming more fluent in English? Well, we're going to get into those details once we get started with today's lesson. But let me tell you that it's just as important as focusing on what we did last class, on small talk, on how to start a conversation, how to break the ice. Well, this other aspect of conversation or conversation skills are as important as the ones we worked with last time. Hi, Victoria. Thank you for connecting. Okay, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Andrea Rial, a teacher of English from Argentina, and I work with adult students at a pre-intermediate and intermediate level, and I help them become more fluent and more confident in English. Okay, having said this, let's plunge into today's lesson. Hello there. Okay, so let me just share my presentation for today, in which we're going to start discussing first this idea of active listening, what it means when we refer to this other aspect of conversation, this other side of the same coin. I decided to include some kind of quotation here that connects active listening to small talk. Because as I said before, if you really want to master small talk, you have to focus both on how to communicate, on what things you can say, and how to listen to the things you're being said. That's why here it says that success in small talk is less about what you say, but it's more connected to how you respond to the answers you're given. And that's going to be our crucial focus today. All right. I don't know if you have ever heard about this very interesting information that is going to pave the way for our lesson today. And it is that 97% of the message that we transmit is conveyed, as it says there, through facial expressions, body language, and tone of voice. 93%, compared to only 7% of the message that is actually transmitted by words. That's why I started telling you about the importance of focusing on this, on how to become an active listener, okay? What we are going to do today is to work on different techniques that you can use to involve yourself in the conversation and to show the other person that you're actively participating in it, that you're actively listening. Okay, let's get started with the first possibility, the first thing you can do. You can use, as it says here, either short verbal affirmations or non-verbal ones. What do we mean by these? Short verbal affirmations might be things such as, oh, I see. If you've seen my YouTube, yes, it's also a YouTube short now, my reel on Instagram, in which I suggest different techniques to listen to people actively, there's one snippet, yeah, that says this one. Oh, really? I see. It's just a person showing interest in the conversation than actually being involved in that. Other possibilities. I think this is one of the most famous ones. Using really, oh, really. You might just say, oh, right. Yeah, you're just showing the, sorry, the other person you are there. Yeah, just a second. This is a live class, you know. Okay, what about this other one? Yeah, sure. In this case, you might use this other expression. For example, if somebody is giving their opinion and perhaps you agree with that, so just by saying, sure, you are showing agreement apart from showing you're listening and you're involved in what the other person is saying. What if somebody says perhaps something interesting, some good news? You might use this other one. How interesting. Please remember what we said before, that 93% of communication, or the basic structure of communication, is transmitted through facial expression and tone of voice. If you decide to use this short verbal affirmation and you don't use the right facial expression or the right intonation, you might even sound rude. Somebody's telling you something really exciting, amazing, and you just say, how interesting. Look at my facial expression there. Or even my tone of voice. How interesting. Oh my goodness, that's not being fluent, let's say. Whenever I talk about fluency, I like saying that it's like just the tip of an iceberg. People generally associate fluency with being able to put ideas into words smoothly, without interruptions. But that's just, as I said before, the tip of the iceberg. There's something much deeper than that. And here comes all these other things like, as I said before, body language, tone of voice. What if we compare my previous answer to, wow, how interesting. My facial expression is different. My tone of voice is different. So whenever you are learning new expressions, new vocabulary, you should also learn in which context you have to use it and with which attitude you are supposed to use that. Because you might read or you might know about this expression, how interesting, but you have to know how to use it as well, okay? What about the non-verbal affirmations? We have here a couple of examples, just making noises like, yeah, uh-huh, wow, yeah. You're showing again that you're involved in the conversation just by making a couple of noises. Let me give you an example. I usually, for this presentation, what I decided to do was to give you two examples in which you can see some of these expressions put directly into practice. In this case, the first one, the first person says, I had the opportunity to travel to Paris last summer. Wonderful news. So look at these, look at the answer. Wow. Again, remember facial expression and tone of voice. How was your experience? I will ask you to think about this same conversation without using this non-verbal affirmation. Directly asking the question, how does that sound if I say, I had the opportunity to travel to Paris last summer? How was your experience? It seems to me as if it were a little bit robotic, yeah, like question, answer. That's why these non-verbal or verbal short affirmations are crucial, are really, really important. Look at the other example. It says, I'm thinking of traveling to Japan next year. Now that I read the examples, I think I feel like traveling. That's why all the examples are connected to that. And the other person says, how interesting. What places are you considering? Do the same exercise, mental exercise. Think about this same conversation without this interaction here. Yeah. Hi, Virginia. Nice to see you there. Okay. Yeah, a robot. It's a strange kind of conversation. So again, as I said before, these short interactions help you make the conversation flow much more natural. Perhaps all these things are kind of natural when you speak in your first language. And if you start focusing too much on the message, on the words that you want to say in English, you forget about that 93% in which you have to add other elements to the communication. So, yes, of course, it is important, or you want to give a good impression with your English and you want to use the right structures, you want to use the right words, but don't forget how important these other things are. Simple things, that will help you sound, again, much more fluent and will give a wonderful impression to the person who's listening to you. Let's move on to another technique. This is just one, and I've got 7, as I told you before. What happens if the other person is not giving good news, but perhaps saying something sad, worrying? Okay, in this case, you have to have expressions handy to show empathy, to show that you understand how the other person is feeling. For example, oh dear, same thing about facial expression. Forget about smiling here, because if you want to show empathy, perhaps instead of doing that, your facial expression should denote that you are feeling sorry, yeah, for what the other person is going through. So, other examples. Oh, that's too bad. That's a shame. How awful. For those of you who perhaps haven't seen this word before, awful means very bad. How awful, how terrible. I'm sorry to hear that. What a pity. Oh gosh. You have a lot of possibilities. My recommendation is for you to try to internalize 1 or 2, those that you feel more comfortable with. I don't know, perhaps because of the length or because of the words that are used. You might say, oh, I don't find myself comfortable when saying, I'm sorry to hear that. So forget about that one. You have other possibilities. Let's look at a couple of examples with some of these phrases. The first dialogue says, I accidentally deleted all the photos from my camera. Okay, perhaps nowadays it's not that bad. We have backups in the cloud, but think about this conversation a couple of years ago. It was really bad, terrible. And so the person listening to that might first react before saying something. Oh, that's a shame. And then, okay, you go on with the conversation. You give your opinion in this case. Losing memories like that must be tough, must be difficult. Then look at the other example. I failed my driving test for the 3rd time. How awful, the other person says. I know how important it is for you. So again, compare these examples to the ones we saw before. Same thing. Look at how these people first react to what they are listening to and then go on with the conversation. Yeah, these are things that add connection to the conversation. Let's move on to our 3rd technique today, which is to use the right body language. Remember that 93% we mentioned at the very beginning, that 93% of the message that is conveyed through facial expression, body language, and tone of voice. In this case, as we said before, you have to be connected to the other person when having a conversation. And it's not just doing that mentally, like following what the other person is saying. It's also physically. We mentioned these in our previous class connected to small talk. We focused on the importance of keeping eye contact. And we also said that eye contact might be easier when the conversation is carried out face to face because you have that person in front of you. But when you are online, either if it's a meeting, a presentation, you can also give the impression of making eye contact by looking right into the camera. I gave you the example last time of looking towards my phone where I'm checking that everything is working well, and you won't get that feeling that I'm actually talking to you. So eye contact is crucial. Then you can also nod. Do you know what that is? I'm doing it with my head. Just to move your head to show that you understand, to show that you're following, to show that you agree, perhaps different things, yeah, in connection to your body language. Smile. Between brackets, it depends on what the conversation is about. You're not going to be smiling if the other person is telling you bad news. In that case, you might frown. Do you know what part of your body you use to frown? Your forehead, yes, like this. You might be showing lack of understanding when you do that, or like, oh gosh, really? Yeah. So the body language you use must take into account the conversation, must take into account what you're talking about. You cannot use the same attitude to every conversation. Okay, in this case, instead of giving you examples as this is something visual, I decided to choose a picture and to ask you, what impression do you get by looking at this woman? What is she transmitting through her body language? If you want to participate through the chat, that would be amazing. You can tell me what feelings you get. Imagine you are talking to a person who's listening to you this way. Most probably, I would feel I'm boring her. Yeah, that she's not really interested in what I'm saying. Not just because of perhaps the lack of a smile, but also because of her arms. She's kind of closed, right? Like not open to what we are talking about. So remember that third technique, as important as the others, body language must go together with your words. Number 4, another technique that you can use is called echo words or echo questions. As the word echo itself denotes, what we are talking about here is copying something, repeating something. If you are using an echo word, you just choose what part of the sentence the other person has said, what you find interesting, and you repeat that. But again, with the right tone of voice, because it has to show surprise. I will give you an example in a minute. The other possibility that you have is to use echo questions. This might be a little bit more challenging because you have to get the structure of the sentence you're listening to, and then you have to use the right auxiliary connected to that sentence and the right subject pronoun. Is this too theoretical? Let me give you an example. Look at this. This first person says he can speak 7 languages. Wow, a lot. So by echoing part of the sentence, I'm showing that I'm involved, that I am connected to what the other person is saying. 7 languages. Yeah, pay attention to the intonation there. You have to show surprise, as we said before. So this is simple. I can perhaps focus on something else. I may say, he can speak 7 languages. He's 7 years old. He's 6 years old. No matter what part of the sentence you choose, it must be something that catches your attention, something that, again, you find surprising. That's why you decide to echo that thing in particular. Look at the other structure of echo phrases, not just an echo word. In this case, the first sentence says, she said she was coming to the meeting. And I say, for example, did she? She's always absent. In this case, as I said before, you have to pay attention to the grammar, the structure of the sentence you have just listened to, because as this verb is in past, you're going to use an auxiliary in past, and you're going to use the same subject pronoun from that original sentence. Is this impossible? No, it isn't. It takes practice. How can you practice that? Invent any sentence you want, say it aloud, and then check how you can use an echo question with that sentence, yeah? And use a variety of structures. Say something in simple present, say something in the future, say something using the present perfect, and then check how you can how you can use an echo question to react to that first sentence. It takes time, practice, but it's not impossible. And perhaps this one, it's a little bit simpler, yeah, because you just take part of the sentence that you found surprising and you just repeat it, right? So let's move on to our 5th technique. In this case, this is something that we also mentioned last time connected to small talk, yeah? Do you remember? Say yes in the chat if you do. Asking open-ended questions. We talked about what an open question is. Let's go over that. Those questions that ask for information, those questions that don't simply require a yes or a no as an answer. That's why open-ended questions are associated with WH questions, because WH questions are the ones that ask for information. What, where, when, who, etc. Yeah? So in this case, one thing that you should take into account is something that we have already said. Be careful not to ask these kind of questions directly after the person has said something Or if you do, don't overuse that technique because the conversation is going to sound as if you were grilling the other person. Do you know what that is? When you grill somebody, you ask a lot of questions as if you were a police person, yeah, a policeman, a policewoman. It doesn't sound as if it were a natural conversation. So let's see a couple of examples to put this into practice and to see how to combine it with the other techniques that we have mentioned. Okay, look at this. I'm thinking about moving house. I have one reaction, two, and then I've got a follow-up question, a WH question. Here it says, are you? Do you remember what technique this is? It's an echo question. So it says, I'm thinking, present continuous to refer to the future. You need to use the verb to be in that echo question. Are you? And then this, a short verbal affirmation. Really? And then you come up with a WH question, any question that you want. For example, in this case, where do you want to move? Same thing in this other example. I've got this sentence saying, she worked there for 10 years. And instead of asking the follow-up question directly, what I have here is first an echo word, 10 years. Wow. Do you remember this other one? A non-verbal affirmation. And then again, I come up with a WH question. You could mentally do the same exercise we did before, read this sentence, and then go on directly with the WH question. It sounds tough, like a conversation that is not really intended to get involved. Yes, as if you were just asking a question for the sake of keeping the conversation going. Yeah. Well, perhaps you might be saying, that's fantastic. Now I know these 5 techniques, I'm going to start using them. But what happens if I'm talking to somebody and I cannot understand what the other person is saying? How can I react to that? How can I use an echo word? How can I use a short non-verbal or verbal affirmation or even a WH question if I couldn't get the point of what that person was saying? You also have some other techniques to show you're involved in the conversation and to show at the same time that you need some kind of clarification. In this case, what you can do is to paraphrase. What does that mean? Okay, if you could catch part of the message but not the whole of it, you might use one of these phrases to check if what you understood is correct or not. Look at these examples. So, what you're saying is that imagine there's something I've said that is not quite clear, and so you might say, so what you're saying is that it's okay not to understand the other person and to just kind of repeat what I have understood? Yes, that was my point. So you could use these phrases to check if what you have understood is okay or not. Another one. Oh, what you mean by this is, or in other words, you are telling me to just say, sorry, I can't catch what you're saying. Yes, of course. Last but not least, I've got this other example. Let me see if I understand you correctly. And so then you paraphrase. Paraphrase means to say something in other words. So when you paraphrase a message, you take what the other person has said and you say it in other words with the same idea, with the same exercise. For those of you who have sat for international exams, this is an exercise that you get in those exams in which you have an original sentence and you have to say the same thing, perhaps with a different word between brackets. So it's the same technique, but now it is applied to a conversation. Fantastic. So in this case, you could get part of the message. Let me give you a couple of examples. Somebody says something like this. I've decided to take a gap year after finishing my studies. But what happens if the listener doesn't really know the meaning of a gap year? You understood the rest of the sentence, but this is not so clear. So that person might say, what you mean by this is that you plan to take a year off before starting your career, right? Okay, so this is something that you can use, as I said before, and as I'm going to repeat over and over again, to show you are involved, to show you care about what the other person is saying. If you don't really care, this might say, oh, how interesting. And you have no idea what the other person is planning to do. But if you really want to show involvement, this is something that you can do when the message is not crystal clear. Same thing here. Look, I wrote this example. There's a glitch with my computer. If the other person doesn't really know the meaning of glitch, but because of the context, he or she might think that means it's a problem, they might use this other sentence here. So what you're saying is that your computer is not working well? Yeah? So you see how useful these phrases are to, again, be an active listener, being involved in the conversation. But let's go one step further. What happens if you didn't catch part, if you didn't catch a thing, if you couldn't understand the whole message? Okay, in that case, you could ask or you could use other phrases to ask the other person to repeat what they have said, or perhaps to say it in other words. Look at this example. What do you mean? That the other person has said something and you directly ask that question. So you want the other person to explain perhaps the same thing in other words if the message was not clear. Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Catch in this case means what? Understand. I didn't understand that. I didn't quite catch that. If you find it difficult to articulate these words together, I didn't quite catch, two suggestions. Either go for something simpler or repeat it over and over again to practice the physical aspect of fluency until you feel comfortable with that phrase. Another possibility, I'm not sure I understand. Facial expression to go together with that sentence. Yes, like, I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay, sorry because, we tend to apologize when we don't understand something. Excuse me, I didn't get it. Sorry. I'm afraid I don't quite understand. So as you can see, these phrases are quite similar. Instead of saying understand, you might use the word catch. Instead of saying sorry, you might say I'm afraid. So you can combine them any way you want to. But my recommendation, again, is for you to keep one or two handy in mind for any situation like this in which you are having a conversation, you are being an active listener, but what the other person has said is not clear to you. It's not that you could catch part of it. The whole idea was not clear. And you shouldn't be ashamed of admitting that something was not clear. We're using another language, not our own, and you might even think, has it ever happened to you that even in your own language, in your mother tongue, you get the feeling that the message is not clear? And we directly ask, yes, the other person to say it over again. So you shouldn't be afraid of using these expressions if you are talking in English and the message the other person is transmitted is not clear to you. Let's see a couple of examples as we did with the other techniques. Okay, one person says, I've decided to take a gap year after finishing my studies. But in this case, imagine that you didn't get the whole idea. So instead of asking for clarification of a gap year, you might say, sorry, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by a gap year? And you go directly into what wasn't clear. Or, same example with a computer. There's a glitch with my computer. I'm not sure I understand a glitch. Okay, so you go directly into what you didn't understand without focusing on what perhaps the idea you might get about that phrase or that sentence that wasn't clear, right? Okay, so 7 techniques for you to be a real active listener, for you to use anytime you're having a conversation to be more fluent in English, because remember, being fluent is an iceberg, it's not just speaking. But there are a few things I will recommend you not to do. Things to avoid when being an active listener. The first one is, try to avoid interrupting the other person. It's better for you to listen actively and respond, make a comment or react once the other person has finished. But if you really need to interrupt it for any reason in particular, if you do so, I recommend you to do it in a polite way. I'm sorry to interrupt you, For example, you might say something like that or any other phrase. Yeah. Something else you should avoid is getting distracted. Getting distracted, how? Okay, by your phone, perhaps, or whatever might distract you. Yeah, just a fly passing by. Just make sure you are in the conversation, involved in that, and paying close attention to what the other person is saying. And again, if you happen to get distracted, it would be great to apologize, to say something like, oh, I'm terribly sorry, I got distracted. What were you saying? This is just one example among many other examples you might think of, right? And last but not least, avoid rehearsing your answer. What is this? Imagine you're having a conversation, the other person is talking about traveling. Let's go on with that idea. And you are thinking, okay, when this person finishes saying that, I'm going to ask, where will, the moment you start thinking about what you're going to say, you get disconnected from the conversation and you lose this 93% of the message that is conveyed through, okay, what we said before, body language, tone of voice, and you might even lose the thread of the conversation if you do that. So my recommendation is speak in English with the English that you have today. Even if you make grammar mistakes, even if you use perhaps a word that is not the right one for the context or for the idea that you want to transmit, you give a much better impression if you become an active listener than if you speak English perfectly well. Of course, go on with your English training, go on practicing your structures, but the moment you have to have a conversation, leave that aside and focus 100% on what the other person is telling you. To wrap all this up, we're going to recap the 7 techniques that we have learned and we have worked with today. The first one was to use verbal or non-verbal affirmations, verbal such as, really, how interesting, I see, and non-verbal ones, those that you transmit just with your voice. Wow, yeah, those things. Remember that it's also very important to show empathy, to show you understand if the other person is giving you bad news or is talking about something frightening, worrying, something negative in general. Here you can use expressions such as, oh dear, that's a shame, I'm really sorry to hear that. Then body language, how we discussed the importance of body language, language with that picture, remember I showed you. It's not just using the right words, that is 7% of your message. Remember, your message is transmitted through, as I said before, tone of voice, body language, and facial expressions. Then you can also use echo words or echo questions. Echo words are very simple to use. It's a very useful technique because you just repeat whatever part of the sentence the other person has said. And of course, that part of the sentence you repeat should be something that has caught your attention. That's why you're repeating it. Yeah. He found $1 million in the street. In the street, or $1 million, whatever. Okay. The other technique we talked about was this one, echo questions. This takes perhaps a little more understanding of structures, but if you want to learn this, you can do it by practicing, by finding examples online. There are lots of pages where you can do online exercises. You just write echo questions, online activities, online exercises, and you will be able to practice that on your own. Then, if you want to keep the conversation going, these techniques here are ways of reacting to what the other person has said. But if you really want to keep the conversation going, the idea is that you use follow-up questions, open-ended questions, those questions that are aimed at getting information, right? Okay, fantastic. And these last 2 techniques are the ones that you can use if the other person is saying something that is not quite clear to you. Remember that the first one, you can just paraphrase, say what the other person has said in other words to check if everything is clear, if what you understood is okay. Or if there's something that you cannot understand, you can ask for clarification. In that case, you might use phrases like, what do you mean? Or do you mean this? It's not clear. I don't quite catch what you're saying. Okay, so all these, as I said before, are these techniques for you to become an active listener to show off in your next conversation. This is really, really important if you're doing business, if you want to give a good impression, if you're in a job interview, yeah. If you're just socializing with somebody, it's not just what you say. Remember that small talk is more about how you react to what you are being said. Okay, so we have come to the end of our lesson today. I hope you have enjoyed it. I hope you have now more tools for your next conversation in English. Remember, I said this in our first lesson. It's really important if you have the possibility of talking to somebody in English, if you can find a conversation partner. I always offer these possibilities to my students. So that's the moment in which you can put all these things into practice. But if you can't, if there's nobody to talk to, talking to yourself also does the trick. So imagine a conversation, imagine a context, and just role play both sides and speak in English. The key to become a more fluent speaker is to speak, speak, and speak. Okay, now I will ask you, if you have enjoyed this lesson, if you found it useful, I will ask you to give this lesson a like. And once it is over, you will have the possibility of writing a comment. You can write comments here in the chat, but then this chat disappears from the video once it is available on YouTube. So leave a comment there if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel to get notifications every time there's a class. I'm giving free lessons every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Argentina time. You can follow me on my Instagram page as well. I post different exercises and things you can do to become more fluent as well. And on my Instagram, you can also register on a WhatsApp group to get direct access to each and every lesson. Thank you, Vir. I hope you have found them useful. And then let me know if you started using them in your next English conversation. People, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And see you again next week. Take care.